Chapter 8 Kiss and Kin. The day the United States entered the First World War, Dad sent President Wilson a telegram which read, "Arriving Washington, 7:03 p.m. train. If you don't know how to use me, I'll tell you how." Whether or not this heartening intelligence took some of the weight off Mr. Wilson's troubled shoulders, Dad never made entirely plain, but he was met at the train and taken over to the War Department. The next time we saw him, he was in uniform, assigned to motion study training in assembling and disassembling the Lewis machine gun and other automatic weapons. He had what probably was the most GI haircut in the entire armed forces, and when he walked into the parlor and shouted, "Attention!" he wanted to hear our heels click. Mother had been planning for several years to take all of us to California to visit our family. When Dad was ordered to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the time seemed opportune. Mother's family was genteel and well-to-do. She was the oldest of 9 children, only 3 of whom were married. The other 6, 2 brothers and 4 sisters, lived with their parents in a spacious house at 426 29th Street in Oakland. The house was fringed with palm trees, magnificent gardens, and concealed but nonetheless imposing outbuildings in which the family indulged its various hobbies. There was a billiard hall, radio shack, greenhouse, pigeon roost, and a place where prize-winning guinea pigs were raised. The Mollers had 3 Packards, a French chauffeur named Henriette, a gardener, Chinese cook, first-story maid, and second-story maid. The Mollers managed, somehow, in spite of their worldly goods, to live fairly simply. They were quiet, introverted, and conservative. They seldom raised their voices and referred to each other as "Dear Eleanor," "Dear Mabel," "Dear Gertrude," and so on. Mother was "Dear Lily." Mother was the only one in her family who had moved from California. Mother had left home after her marriage, as introverted and conservative, and possibly even more shy and bookish than any of the others. In 10 years, she had 7 children. She was lecturing around the country. She was a career woman, and her name kept bobbing up in newspapers. Frankly, the Mollers didn't know exactly what to make of dear Lily, but they knew they loved her. Even before we visited California, we knew all about the household at Oakland and its inhabitants, because Mother used to like to tell us about her girlhood. We knew the arrangement of the house, even down to the full-length mirror on the hall door, which Mother's younger sisters used to open at night at just the right angle so they could watch Dad's courting technique. Hearing Mother tell about the courtship, the sparking on the sofa, we used to wonder what Mother's parents had thought when Dad first came to call. He had met Mother in Boston about a year before, when she was on that well-chaperoned tour to Europe with several other Oakland girls. The chaperone, who was Dad's cousin, had introduced him to all the girls, but he had selected Miss Lily as the one to whom to shower his attention. He took Mother for a ride in his first automobile, some early ancestor of foolish carriage, as Dad and Mother, dressed in dusters and wearing goggles, went scorching through the streets of Boston. Bystanders tossed insults and ridicule in their direction. "Get a horse! Get a horse!" Dad started to shout back in answer, but thought better of it. He was already in love with Mother and was anxious to make a good impression. Mother's shyness and ladylike demeanor had a quieting effect on him, and he was displaying his most genteel behavior. "Get a horse, 23 skidoo!" It was almost more than Dad could bear, but he didn't answer. "Say, Noah, what are you doing with that ark?" That did it. Dad slowed the car and cocked his checkered cap belligerently over one eye. "Collecting animals, like the good Lord told me," he screamed back. "All I need now is a jackass. Hop in." After that, Dad decided he might as well be himself, and his breezy personality and quick laugh made Mother forget her shyness and reserve. Soon she found herself laughing almost as loud and as long at his jokes as he. As was its custom, the automobile inevitably broke down, and crowds of children gathered around. Mother stopped them from breathing down Dad's neck by taking them aside and telling them stories. When the car was fixed and they were on their way again, Dad asked her how she had managed to hold the children's attention. "I told them stories from Alice in Wonderland," Mother said. "You see, I have 8 younger brothers and sisters, and I know what children like." "Alice in Wonderland?" Dad exclaimed. "You mean kids really like that? They must be raising different kinds of kids than when I was a boy. I never could get into it myself." "Of course they like it. They love it," Mother said. "You really should read it. I think everybody should. It's a classic." "If you say so, Miss Lily," said Dad, who had already made up his mind that she was going to be Mrs. Gilbreth. "I'll read it." Mother went on to Europe. After her return, Dad followed her out to the West Coast. When he arrived at Oakland, he telephoned the Mollers' house. "Hello," he said. Who do you think this is?" "Really, I have no idea." "Well, guess, can't you?" "No, I'm sorry, I have no idea." "Aw, you know who it is," said Dad, who now had read the book that Mother said everyone should read. "It's the White Rabbit from Boston." The who? The White Rabbit from Boston. Oh, I see. I think you must want to talk with one of my daughters. My goodness, said Dad, who didn't stop swearing until after he was married. Who's this? This is Mrs. Moeller. To whom did you wish to speak? May I please speak with Miss Lily? Dad asked meekly. Who should I say is calling? You might say Mr. Rabbit, please, said Dad. Mr. W. Rabbit of Boston. A few days later, Dad was invited to Mother's house for tea, where he met her mother and father and most of her brothers and sisters. A workman was building a new fireplace in the living room, and as Dad was escorted through that room, he stopped to watch the man laying bricks. Now there's an interesting job, said Dad, in a conversational tone to the Moellers. Laying brick. It looks easy to me. Dead easy. I don't see why these workmen claim that laying brick is skilled labor. I'll bet anyone could do it. Right this way, Mr. Gilbreth, said Mother's father. We're having tea on the porch. Dad wouldn't be hurried. It seems to me, he continued in his flat New England twang, that all you do is pick up a brick, put some mortar on it, and put it in the fireplace. The bricklayer turned around to survey the plump but dapper dude from the east. Nothing personal meant, said Dad, with his most patronizing smile. My good man. Sure, that's all right, said the workman, but he was furious. Dead easy, eh? Like to try it, mister? Dad, who had set his sights on just such an invitation, said he guessed not. Mother tugged at his sleeve and fidgeted. The porch is right this way, her father repeated. Here, the bricklayer said, handing Dad the trowel. Try it. Dad grinned and took the trowel. He grabbed a brick, flipped it into position in his hand, slapped on the mortar with a rotary motion of the trowel, placed the brick, scraped off the excess mortar, and reached for a second brick, flipped it, and was about to slap on more mortar when the workman reached out and took back his trowel. That's enough, you old hod-carrier, he shouted, cuffing Dad affectionately on the back. Dude from the east you might be, but it's many a thousand brick you've laid in your life, and don't try to tell me different. Dad dusted off his hands gingerly with a spotless handkerchief. Dead easy, he said, my good man. Dad behaved himself pretty well during the tea, but on later visits he'd sometimes interrupt Mother's parents in the middle of sentences and go over and pick up Mother from her chair. Excuse me just a minute, he'd tell his future in-laws. I think Miss Lily would look more decorative up here. He'd swing her up and place her on top of a bookcase or a china closet, and then go back and sit down. Mother was afraid to move for fear of upsetting her perch, and would remain up there primly, determined not to lose her dignity. Dad pretended he had forgotten all about her, as he resumed the conversation. We knew, too, that the first time Dad had been invited to spend a weekend at the Moellers, he had thrown himself with a wheeze and a sigh onto his bed, which had collapsed and enveloped him in a heavy, betasseled canopy. The things your daddy shouted before Papa and your Uncle Fred could untangle him to the tassels. Mother tittered. I can tell you, it was an education for us girls, and I suspect for the boys, too. Thank goodness he stopped talking like that. And what did your family really think of him? We asked. Really? I never could understand it, Mother said, glancing over at Dad, who was at his smuggest, but they thought he was simply wonderful. Mama said it was like a breath of fresh air when he walked into a room, and Papa said the business of laying bricks wasn't just showing off, but was your father's way of telling them that he had started out by making a living with his hands. Is that what you're trying to tell them, Daddy? We asked. Trying to tell them nothing, Dad shouted. Anybody who knows anything about New England knows the Bunkers and the Gilbreths, or Galbraiths, descend through Governor Bradford right to the Mayflower. I wasn't trying to tell them anything. What did you lay the brick for then? We insisted. When some people walk into a parlor, Dad said, they like to sit down at the piano and impress people by playing Bach. When I walk into a parlor, I like to lay brick. That's all. There were 7 children in the family when we set out with Mother for California. Fred was the baby, and was train sick all the way from Niagara Falls to the Golden Gate. Lil, the next youngest, had broken a bone in her foot 3 weeks before and had to stay in her berth. Mother was expecting another baby in 3 months and didn't always feel too well herself. The chance to return with her children to her parents' home meant more to Mother than any of us realized, and she was anxious to show us off in the best possible light and to have her family approve of us. I know you are going to be good and quiet and do what your grandparents and your aunts and uncles tell you, Mother kept saying. You want to remember that they're very affectionate, but they're not accustomed to having children around anymore. They're going to love you, but they're not used to noise and people running around. Mother had spent a good bit of money buying us new outfits so that we would make a good impression in California, and she thought she ought to economize on our train accommodations. We were jammed, 2 in a berth, into a drawing room in 2 sections. She brought along a sterno cooking outfit and 2 suitcases of food, mostly cereals and graham crackers. We ate almost all of our meals in the drawing room, journeying to the dining car only on those infrequent occasions when Mother yielded to our complaints that scurvy was threatening to set in. She spent most of her time trying to make Lil comfortable and trying to find some kind of milk that would stay on Fred's stomach. She had little opportunity to supervise the rest of us, and we wandered up and down the train, sampling the contents of the various ice water tanks, peeking into berths, and in the case of Bill and Frank, turning somersaults and wrestling with each other in the aisles. At each stop, Mother would leave Anne in charge of the broken foot and upset stomach department while she rushed into the station to buy milk, food, and sterno cans. The rest of us would get off the train to stretch our legs and see whether a new engine had been switched on. Once the train started up again, Mother would insist upon a roll call. After 4 days in the train with no baths except for the sponge variety, we were not very sanitary when we reached California. Mother wanted us to look our best when we got off the train, and she planned to give us each a personal scrubbing and see that we had on clean clothes. An hour or so before we got to Oakland. Her oldest brother, Uncle Fred, surprised her and us by boarding the train at Sacramento. He found us in the drawing room in the middle of a meal. Suitcases were open on the floor, and there was a pile of diapers in a corner. The baby, still train sick, was crying in Mother's arms. Lil's foot was hurting, and she was crying on the couch. Bill was doing acrobatics on the bed. There were bowls of cream of wheat and graham crackers on a card table. The place smelled of sterno, and worse. Uncle Fred used to joke about it. When we were older, it reminded him of a zoo, he said. But at the time, you never would have known he noticed anything unusual. Lily, dear, it's good to see you, he said. You look simply radiant, not a day older. Oh, Fred, Fred. Mother put down the baby, wiped her eyes apologetically, and clung to her brother. It's ridiculous to cry, isn't it? But it means so much having you here. Was it a hard trip, dear? Mother was already bustling around, straightening up the drawing room. I wouldn't want to do it every day, she admitted, but it's almost over, and you're here. You're my first taste of home. Uncle Fred turned to us. Welcome to California, he said. Don't tell me now. I can name each of you. Let's see. The baby here making all the noise, he's my namesake, Fred. And here's little Lil, of course, with a broken foot, and Billy. You're just like we imagined you, Martha told him, hanging on to his hand. Are we like you imagined us? Just exactly, he said gravely, right down to the last freckle. I hope you can't imagine them like this, Mother said, but she was happy now. Never mind, you'll never know them in a few minutes. You take the boys out into the car, and I'll start getting the girls cleaned up right now. Of course, none of them will be really clean until I can get them into a tub. We were presentable on our best behavior when we finally arrived in Oakland, where Mother's sisters and brothers were waiting with the 3 limousines. It was a wonderful welcome, but we thought our aunts were the kissingest kin in the world. They must think we're sissies, whispered Bill, who was 5 and didn't like to be kissed by anyone except Mother, and only in the privacy of his boudoir. Lily, dear, it's good to see you and the dear children, they kept repeating. Each of us had a godparent among Mother's brothers and sisters, and now the godparents began sorting us out. Here, little Ernestine, you come with me, dear, said Aunt Ernestine. Come, Martha, dear, said Aunt Gertrude, you're mine. Give me your hand, Frank, dear, said Aunt Eleanor. Dear this and dear that, Billy whispered scornfully. Where's dear Billy? Asked Aunt Mabel. Right here, dear, said Bill, but Bill, like the rest of us, felt happy and warm inside because of the welcome. The aunts led us over to the automobiles, where Henriette, in black puttees, with a stiff-brimmed cap tucked under his arm, was standing at rigid attention. Uncle Frank and Uncle Bill got behind the wheels of the other 2 machines. The glassed-in cars seemed formal and luxurious as we drove from the station to 29th Street, and Henriette managed to remain at attention even when sitting down. We wondered what Daddy would say about Henriette. Certainly rigid attention wasn't the most efficient way to drive an automobile. Anyone with half an eye could see the posture was fatiguing to the point of exhaustion. It was some class, though. Frank and Bill started to crank down the windows so they could put out their hands when he turned the corners, but Anne and Ernestine shook their heads. And for the first 2 haulers, Roadhog is going to get a punch in the nose, Ernestine whispered. Mother's father and mother, Papa and Grocie, we called them, were waiting for us on the steps of the house. We thought they were picture book grandparents. Papa was tall, lean, and courtly, with gates ajar collar, string tie, and soft white mustache. Grocie was short and fragile, with a gray pompadour and smiling brown eyes. Grocie kissed us and called us dears. Papa shook hands and said that each day we stayed in his house, he was going to take us all down to a toy shop and let us pick out a toy apiece. Honestly, Anne bubbled, it's like stepping into a fairy tale, 3 deep with godmothers and with wishes that come true. That's the way we want it to be for Lily's dear children, Grocie said. Now, what's your very first wish? Tell me, and I'll see if I can make it come true. That was easy. After 4 days of Mother's drawing-room cookery with only infrequent trips to the dining car, what we wanted most was something good to eat, a real home-cooked meal. I hate to say it after the way Mother's been slaving over a hot sterno can, said Ernestine, but we're starving. If my wish would come true, Mother hastened to change the subject, you'd all be sitting in bathtubs right this minute, washing soot out of your hair. Grocie said we were going to have a big dinner in about an hour and a half, and that she didn't want to spoil our appetites. How about just a little snack right now, she suggested, and then baths and dinner. How about some graham crackers with milk? I know how much little children like graham crackers, and we have a great big supply of them. The mention of graham crackers took away our appetites, and we said we'd skip the snack and get our baths. Such dear children, Rosie squeezed us. They want their dear mother's wish to come true.